Sometimes the cruelest words come from those who should know better, and Martha Sullivan had heard them all her life. In the frontier town of Cedar Ridge, folks whispered warnings about the heavyset woman who ran the general store, calling her unworthy of any man's attention. But when Jacob Bear McKinnon, the mountain man from the high peaks, rode into town, he didn't listen to their harsh judgment. He saw her gentle heart and quiet strength that everyone else missed. While the townspeople mocked her, Bear chose her above all others. What happens when two lonely souls find love where society says it shouldn't exist? The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered boardwalk of Cedar Ridge, Montana, in the autumn of 1873. Dust motes danced in the golden light filtering through the windows of Sullivan's general store. Inside, Martha Sullivan carefully arranged bolts of fabric on the wooden counter. Her apron, faded from countless washings, bore the stains of honest work and the weight of 28 years of enduring whispers. Martha moved with practiced efficiency through her domain, straightening canned goods, checking inventory. She had learned early that perfection in small things might earn her a measure of peace from the world's judgment. The store smelled of leather, coffee beans, and the lavender soap she made herself. Simple pleasures, comforts in a solitary existence. Cedar Ridge had grown from a mining camp into a proper town, with a church, a school, and enough civilized folks to make cruelty an art form. The buildings lined the main street like weathered soldiers, their false fronts hiding a simple truth. This was still the frontier, where survival mattered more than politeness. Yet somehow the townsfolk found energy to spare for judgment. "Morning, Martha," called Doc Henley as he stepped through the entrance. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound in the cool reception most visitors offered her. Dr. Samuel Henley was one of the few souls in Cedar Ridge who treated Martha with genuine kindness. His profession had taught him to see beyond surfaces, to the pain beneath. "Good morning, doctor," Martha replied, her voice soft. "How's Mrs. Patterson faring with that cough?" "She'll mend, thanks to that honey and herb mixture you prepared." He paused at the counter, studying her face with gentle concern. "You look tired, my dear. Are you sleeping well?" Martha's fingers found the edge of her apron, smoothing it needlessly. "Well enough. Can I help you find something today?" Doc Henley recognized the deflection but didn't press. He'd learned Martha Sullivan was like a wild creature. Approach too directly, and she'd retreat into herself. "Just need some of that good coffee you stock, and perhaps a few of those peppermint sticks for the Morrison children." As she worked, Doc Henley noticed how she held herself, shoulders slightly hunched, as if expecting a blow. Yet there was a dignity in her bearing that no amount of cruel words could diminish. He remembered when she first arrived, barely 18 and newly orphaned, carrying nothing but a small trunk and the deed to this store. He'd watched her transform from a frightened girl into a capable businesswoman, even as the town's opinion of her hardened into something ugly and permanent. The doctor placed coins on the counter, his eyes serious. "Martha, you know you have friends in this town, don't you? Good people who see your worth." The kindness in her voice nearly undid her, but Martha had learned to armor herself against both cruelty and tenderness. "Thank you, doctor. That means more than you know." As he left, she returned to her task. Each movement was a small act of defiance. The store was her refuge, her sanctuary, and her prison. 20 miles north, in a cabin perched on the edge of the timberline, Jacob Bear McKinnon knelt by his stone fireplace. The flames caught, casting warm light across the rough-hewn walls. He stood, his massive frame unfolding to its full 6'4" height. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, his beard threaded with silver despite his 35 years. The wilderness had marked him. Scars from bear claws traced pale lines across his forearms. On the mantelpiece sat a small wooden cross he'd carved, a reminder that even in solitude, he was not alone. His supplies were running low. It meant a journey to Cedar Ridge, a necessary evil. Bear gathered his pelts, loading his pack horse with the furs that would buy him another month of coffee and flour. The ride to town always stirred complicated feelings. The need for supplies warred with his distaste for the company of others. The war had changed him. 4 years with the Union Army had left him with memories that visited him in dreams and a preference for the honest company of mountains over the cruelties of human society. He crested the final hill and saw the town spread below. Smoke rose from chimneys. It looked peaceful enough. But Bear knew better. He had business to conduct, supplies to buy, and if fortune smiled, he'd be back in his cabin before sundown. He had no way of knowing this trip would be different. That destiny waited for him in the form of a kind-hearted woman who had endured more judgment than any soul deserved. He rode toward town, thinking only of coffee and flour, unaware his life was about to change forever. The Cedar Ridge Community Hall buzzed with conversation. Martha stood near the refreshment table, ladling punch. She had attended these gatherings for 10 years, always helping, always on the edges, always hoping this time might be different. Tonight she wore her best blue dress. For a brief moment that morning, she had allowed herself to imagine that perhaps someone might see past her size to the woman beneath. "Look at her putting on airs," whispered Mrs. Hartwell, her voice carrying farther than she intended. "As if fancy hair and a pressed dress could change what everyone knows." Martha's hand trembled slightly, but her smile never wavered. She had learned to wear composure like armor. The children at least treated her with affection. "Miss Martha, this punch is wonderful," young Tommy Morrison said with a gap-toothed grin. "Ma says you make the best sweets in the whole territory." Martha's smile became genuine as she ruffled his hair. Then William Hatch, the town's self-appointed leader, approached, a man who had made his fortune through questionable land deals and intimidation. His pale eyes fixed on Martha with cold calculation. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice carrying, "you've outdone yourself, though I suppose when a woman has no other prospects, she might as well perfect her domestic skills." The conversations around them quieted. Martha felt her cheeks burn, but kept her voice steady. "I'm glad you're enjoying them, Mr. Hatch." "Oh, I am, though I can't help but wonder why you continue to attend. Surely a woman of your situation might find better uses for her time." His cruelty was delivered with a smile. "Perhaps we should establish a separate social hour for those who don't quite fit in." A few people laughed nervously. Martha gripped the ladle, her knuckles white. "That seems unnecessary," Doc Henley interjected. "Miss Sullivan contributes more to this community than most." Hatch's smile turned predatory. A good doctor, always the champion of lost causes. The implication hung in the air, designed to embarrass them both. Martha felt her composure finally cracking. That was when the hall doors opened with enough force to bang against the walls. Jacob McKinnon stood silhouetted in the doorway, his massive frame filling the entrance. The hall fell silent. The mountain man was a legend, an oddity. He rarely came to town and never to socials. His dark eyes swept the room, his gaze landing on Martha's face, on the unshed tears she fought to contain. He walked directly to her, the crowd parting before him. "Miss Sullivan, isn't it?" he said with a small bow of his head. "I've heard your store stocks the finest goods." Martha blinked, startled. "Yes, sir. That's kind of you to say. I wonder if I might trouble you for some of that punch." With shaking hands, Martha served him. Their fingers brushed. She was surprised by the gentleness of his touch. He sipped the punch and nodded. "Excellent. You made this yourself?" "Yes, sir. My grandmother's recipe." "She taught you well." His eyes swept the room again, taking in Hatch's scowl. Then he unwrapped a leather bundle, revealing a small wooden figurine, a delicate bird in flight, carved with remarkable skill. "I carved this during the long winter evenings," he said, placing it on the table. "I thought you might appreciate it, given how you've built such a fine nest here." Martha stared at the gift, overwhelmed. I can't accept this. It's too fine." "Already carved it," he said simply. "Can't uncarve it." Hatch stepped forward, his face flushed. "How touching. I'm surprised to see you taking such interest in our local oddities, McKinnon." Bear turned slowly to face him. Something in his expression made people step back. "Oddities? I'm not sure I follow your meaning, Hatch. We all have our place in the natural order. Some folks are meant for certain situations. Others are better suited to different circumstances." Bear considered this. "I've spent considerable time studying the natural order. And one thing I've learned is that the creatures with the loudest roars are usually the most frightened. The insult landed with surgical precision. I'm not sure a man who lives like a hermit is qualified to judge civilized society, Hatch sneered. Maybe not, Bear agreed. But I know enough to recognize quality when I see it. He turned back to Martha, his expression softening. Miss Sullivan, would you do me the honor of a dance? The request sent a shock wave through the room. Martha's eyes widened. No one had asked her to dance in years. I, I'm not much of a dancer, she whispered. Neither am I, he admitted with a slight smile. But the music's playing. He offered his arm. After a moment, she took it. He led her to the center of the room. The fiddle player began a gentle waltz. He placed one large hand carefully on her waist and took her other. He guided her with unexpected grace. Don't mind them, he said quietly. Folks who need to hurt others to feel better about themselves aren't worth your worry. She looked up into his dark eyes and saw genuine kindness, free of pity. Why are you doing this? Because you deserve better than their poison, he said simply, and because I wanted to. When the song ended, he released her. Thank you for the dance, Miss Sullivan. He retrieved his hat. Good evening, folks. As he walked toward the door, Martha found her voice. Mr. McKinnon. He turned. Thank you. No need for thanks, he said. Just treating you the way any decent person should be treated. He left then, disappearing into the night as suddenly as he'd appeared. Martha stood holding the wooden bird, aware of every eye in the room. The whispers would start immediately, but for once, she didn't care. For the first time in years, someone had seen her as worth defending, and that changed everything. 3 days later, the bell above her door chimed. Jacob McKinnon's imposing frame filled her doorway. Good morning, Miss Sullivan, he said, removing his hat. He'd taken extra care with his appearance. Good morning, Mr. McKinnon, she replied, her hands smoothing her apron. How can I help you today? He approached the counter, a leather pouch clinking softly. I'm in need of some supplies. Coffee beans if you have them. As Martha weighed out the beans, she stole glances at him. The scars on his hands and forearms told a story of a hard life. Yet those same hands had carved the delicate bird now sitting on her mantelpiece. The mountains must be beautiful this time of year, she said. They are. Aspens are turning gold, though it can get lonely up there, especially when the snow flies. The admission surprised her. She had assumed he chose solitude because he preferred it. Do you ever think about living closer to town? Sometimes, he considered. There are advantages. Easier supplies. Conversation. He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. Company of quality people. The words sent a warmth through her chest. Before she could respond, the bell chimed again. Mrs. Patterson entered, stopping short when she saw Jacob. Oh, Mr. McKinnon. Jacob nodded politely. Actually, he said, not moving to leave, I was wondering if you might have any of those peppermint sticks Doc Henley mentioned. Martha blinked. She couldn't imagine the mountain man buying children's candy. Of course. How many would you like? A dozen should do. As she gathered the candy, she knew this purchase would be all over town by evening. Planning to spoil someone's young ones? Mrs. Patterson asked with false casualness. Thought I might share them, he replied easily. Kids always appreciate a small treat. He paid, his fingers brushing hers. Some things are worth the thoughtfulness. After he left, Mrs. Patterson moved to the counter. Well, that was interesting. I've never known Jacob McKinnon to buy candy before. People change, Martha said mildly, though her heart was still racing. 2 hours later, Jacob reappeared. This time he carried his trapping knife, the handle worn from years of service. Martha realized with a jolt that the imposing man was nervous. Miss Sullivan, he said, I was wondering if you might join me for coffee at the hotel restaurant, if you can spare the time. The invitation was a serious step. A woman visiting with a man, unchaperoned, implied intentions. Her reputation was already fragile. But as she looked into his honest face, she realized she was tired of living by other people's rules. I suppose I could close for an hour. It's been a slow day. His face lit up with a smile that transformed him. I'd be honored by your company. As she prepared to close the store, she caught her reflection in the window. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman who had somewhere important to be. The walk to the hotel was an ordeal of stares and whispers, but Jacob seemed indifferent, walking beside her with easy confidence. At a corner table in the restaurant, the coffee arrived, hot and strong. "I hope this doesn't cause you difficulty," Jacob said quietly. "People talking." She found herself being honest. "It might, but I'm tired of living my life according to what other people think." His respect for her answer was plain. That takes courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing. She asked him what brought him to the mountains. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "The war," he said simply. "4 years of seeing what men can do to each other changes a person. When it ended, I needed quiet, space to think." She, in turn, told him of her parents' deaths, of how the store gave her purpose when she couldn't find it elsewhere. "It's a fine purpose," he said. "You've served the community well." The simple acknowledgement meant more than any flowery compliment. He saw the value in her work, in her. As they walked back to the store, he spoke again. "I'll be heading back to the mountains tomorrow, but I'll need supplies again in a few weeks." "I'll be here," she replied. Then with a newfound boldness, "You're welcome any time, Mr. McKinnon." "Jacob," he corrected gently. "I'd be pleased if you'd call me Jacob." "Jacob," she repeated, liking the sound of it. "And I'm Martha." He smiled at that, the expression transforming his stern features. Martha, a good, strong name. After he left, she stood in her store, the familiar space now feeling larger, filled with possibility. The gossip about her coffee with Jacob McKinnon would spread quickly. But for the first time in her adult life, Martha found she didn't care. She had been seen. And that had changed everything. The silver locket had belonged to Martha's mother. Inside was a tiny photograph of her parents on their wedding day, their faces bright with hope. Martha wore it close to her heart, a symbol of the belonging she longed for. 3 weeks had passed since her visit to Jacob's mountain cabin. He had kept his promise, calling on her regularly. The town had taken notice, and their reactions ranged from curious whispers to outright hostility. "It's becoming quite the scandal," Mrs. Hartwell announced loudly as she entered the store. "A respectable woman simply doesn't entertain men in such a familiar manner." Martha continued folding fabric with steady hands, though her cheeks burned. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartwell. How can I help you today?" "You can help by conducting yourself with more propriety," the older woman sniffed. "Mark my words, young lady, no good will come of encouraging such unsuitable attention." After she left, Martha gripped the silver locket through her dress. The criticism stung because it echoed her own fears, that she was foolish to believe a man like Jacob could truly care for her. The bell chimed again. William Hatch entered, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. They had cold eyes and an air of barely contained violence. "Miss Sullivan," Hatch said, his tone deceptively pleasant, "I have a proposition for you. I am prepared to make you a very generous offer for your store." Martha's blood ran cold. "My store isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price," one of the strangers said, his voice a flat menace. "Question is whether you're smart enough to take the easy money or if we have to make things difficult." Hatch's smile never wavered. "I should mention I've heard disturbing rumors about your association with that mountain hermit. People are questioning whether someone who shows such poor judgment can be trusted in business dealings." The threat was clear. She felt her world shifting, realizing the lengths Hatch would go to acquire what he wanted. After they left, she sank onto a stool, her hands shaking. That evening, Jacob was waiting for her. "You look troubled," he said. She told him everything. His expression darkened. "You're worried about what being seen with me might cost you." "I'm worried about losing everything I've worked for," she said, the words harsher than she intended. "This store is all I have." "So you think it might be better if I stayed away?" The pain in his voice cut through her fear. She saw hurt and resignation warring in his expression. "No," she said quickly. "That's not what I want. But I'm frightened, Jacob. Hatch has power in this town." He stepped closer, his large hands gentle as they cupped her face. "Martha, men like Hatch prey on fear. The more you give in, the stronger they become. Easy words when it's not your livelihood at stake." His voice was quiet but intense. You think I don't have anything to lose? You think my feelings for you don't put me at risk? The full weight of their situation settled over her. They were both outcasts, both vulnerable. What are we going to do? She whispered. We're going to stand together, he said firmly. We're going to refuse to let fear dictate our choices. That night, alone by her fire, Martha held the silver locket and thought about courage. Her parents had been brave enough to choose each other. Perhaps it was time for her to find her own. The next morning, several of her regular customers were absent. Mrs. Thompson, one of her most loyal, entered looking distressed. Martha, dear, I'm so sorry, but my husband says I shouldn't shop here anymore. He's afraid Mr. Hatch might make trouble for our business. After she left, Martha stood alone, the walls closing in. She faced a terrible choice: end her association with Jacob and salvage her business, or stand firm and risk losing everything. The silver locket seemed to pulse against her chest, a reminder of a love strong enough to overcome convention. When Jacob appeared that evening, she was ready. I've been thinking, she began, her voice strong. If Hatch wants a fight, then perhaps it's time to give him one. But I need to know that whatever comes, we'll face it together. His smile was answer enough. Together, he promised. Martha touched the silver locket one last time. Love, she realized, always required courage. The question was whether they had enough between them to see this through. But their troubles were just beginning. Hatch wasn't just a bully. He was a monster. And they were about to uncover a conspiracy that ran so deep, it threatened to tear the entire town apart. The forged property deed lay on Doc Henley's kitchen table like a cancer. Martha stared at the papers, realizing her fight with William Hatch was about more than her store. It was part of a systematic theft that had been robbing families of their land for years. Where did you get this? She whispered. Doc Henley explained that young Tommy Morrison had seen it on Hatch's desk while delivering medicine. If this document were genuine, the doctor said, it would mean Hatch owned the land before your uncle ever filed his claim. It would invalidate your inheritance. But it's not real, Martha insisted. Hatch doesn't need it to be perfect, Jacob said grimly. He just needs it to be convincing enough to tie you up in court for years. In the meantime, you lose your livelihood and are forced to sell. It was the same pattern he'd used throughout the valley. A mysterious barn fire, a poisoned well, an attack by unknown assailants. Each time, a family in crisis, and each time, Hatch was there with an offer. I've been trying to gather evidence for months, Doc Henley said, his voice filled with suppressed anger. But he's clever. He always maintains plausible deniability. Until now, Jacob said, this document is direct evidence of fraud. It would be, if we could prove it was in his possession, the doctor countered. Just then, a new voice spoke from the doorway. Evening, folks. It was Sheriff Tom Bradley. Martha's heart sank. Bradley was known to be one of Hatch's closest allies. I think we need to talk, the sheriff said, his tone surprisingly sympathetic. He sat at the table. I know about Hatch's activities. 3 years ago, he tried to force my sister's family off their farm. They sold and left. I've never forgotten it. I swore an oath to uphold the law, not to look the other way while influential men break it. He explained his predicament. He had suspicions, but no proof that would stand up in court. The forged deed was a start, but it wasn't enough. We need to catch him in the act, Bradley said. His eyes found Martha's. And the only way to do that is to use you as bait. Absolutely not, Jacob said firmly. I won't have her used as bait for a man who's already proven he'll use violence. Jacob, Martha said quietly, this isn't just about my store anymore. This is about justice for everyone Hatch has hurt. She looked at the sheriff. What's the plan? The plan was dangerous. Martha would pretend to reconsider Hatch's offer. When he arrived with the forged documents to pressure her into a sale, the law would be waiting. But the risk was immense. Hatch would be flanked by his violent associates, Crawford and Pike. We'll have backup, Bradley assured them. I've already contacted Deputy Marshal Harrison in Helena. If we can provide him with evidence of a federal crime and land fraud qualifies, he'll come with enough men to handle Hatch's hired guns. Jacob stood abruptly, pacing the room. This is madness, Martha went to him. Look at me. He turned, and she saw the fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. You told me the mountains taught you to face hard truths. The hard truth is, Hatch won't stop until someone stops him. I can't lose you, he said, the admission torn from him. Not when I've just found you. She reached up, touching his face. You won't lose me, but I need you to trust me to be strong enough for this. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, he looked at the sheriff. What do you need me to do? As Jacob and Martha walked home through the quiet streets, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the hotel. It was Crawford. He had seen their late-night meeting. By morning, Hatch would know his enemies were planning something. The race was on. The next morning, Martha waited in her store. The air was thick with a tension so heavy it felt hard to breathe. Jacob was hidden in her back room, his father's rifle ready. Doc Henley was next door, his medical bag open. Deputy Marshal Harrison and his men were hidden across the street. Hatch arrived, flanked by his men, a leather portfolio under his arm. Miss Sullivan, he said with a smug smile, I'm pleased you've reconsidered. Circumstances have forced me to be more practical, she replied, her voice steady. A wise woman adapts. He spread the forged documents on the counter. As you can see, my claim to this property is undeniable. She leaned over the papers, positioning herself so the lawmen outside had a clear view. These seem to be in order, she said loudly. Indeed. Now, if you'll just sign this bill of sale. Actually, Mr. Hatch, a new voice said from the doorway. Sheriff Bradley stepped inside, his badge glinting. I think we need to examine those documents more carefully. Hatch's face went from smug to furious in a heartbeat. Marshal Harrison entered behind the sheriff, followed by 3 more deputies, their rifles raised. William Hatch, Harrison said, his voice like cold iron, you're under arrest for land fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy. Crawford and Pike went for their guns, but before they could clear their holsters, a single shot roared from the back room. Crawford spun around, clutching a bloody shoulder, and fell to the floor. Jacob had fired from the shadows, his aim precise, disabling but not killing. Pike, seeing his partner go down, threw his hands in the air. It was over. As they led Hatch away in chains, he turned to Martha one last time, his eyes burning with hate. This isn't over, he snarled. I have friends. I'll be back. Maybe, Sheriff Bradley said, but your friends will find it harder to help you from a federal prison. As the crowd that had gathered began to disperse, a new, more hopeful energy filled the town. But the true test of Cedar Ridge was yet to come, because Hatch was right about one thing. He did have friends, and his arrest had just kicked over a hornet's nest that was bigger and more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. They had won the battle, but the war for the soul of the valley had just begun, and the next enemy would not be a simple bully. He would be a ghost from Jacob's past, a man with a darkness that made William Hatch look like a choir boy. The bronze bell in Cedar Ridge's church tower rang, summoning the community, not for worship, but for a reckoning. Word of Hatch's arrest had spread, and now the town gathered to learn the full scope of his crimes. Deputy Marshal Harrison stood on the steps of the sheriff's office, a crate of seized documents at his feet. One by one, he laid out the truth, the forged deeds, the intimidation, the arson, the poisoned wells, the families driven from their homes. As the crowd listened, a collective shame and anger washed over them. These weren't abstract crimes. These were their neighbors, their friends, and they had all looked the other way. The Hendersons, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice filled with dawning horror. Their barn fire. That wasn't an accident, was it? We believe it was arson, Harrison confirmed. Each revelation was a hammer blow, shattering the town's willful ignorance. They had let a predator live among them, and his power had been built on their fear and their silence. Then in the middle of the square, something shifted. The fear that had held Cedar Ridge in its grip for so long finally broke. As the crowd began to disperse, their whispers no longer about Martha, but about justice and restitution, Jacob turned to her. He held something small and carefully wrapped in his large hands. A simple wedding ring, carved from mountain oak. Martha, he said, his voice for her alone, I know this isn't the most romantic setting, but I can't wait another moment. He dropped to one knee in the dusty street, heedless of the remaining onlookers. I love you, Martha Sullivan. I love your strength, your kindness, your courage. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears streamed down her face. All the years of loneliness, of being judged and dismissed, washed away in that single perfect moment. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jacob McKinnon, I will marry you. He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She threw her arms around his neck, and the kiss they shared was a public declaration, a promise that their love had survived its greatest test. The town, or what was left of its good and decent heart, erupted in applause. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Martha stood before a mirror, adjusting the ivory silk wedding dress that had belonged to her mother. The old tears in the fabric had been mended with silver thread, transforming the damage into something beautiful, much like her own journey. The church was fuller than it had ever been. Jacob waited at the altar, his eyes holding all the wildness and freedom of the mountains he loved. When he saw her, his face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. Their vows were a testament to everything they had overcome, a promise to stand beside each other, to see each other's strength, to choose each other every single day. As they left the church, now husband and wife, they were met not with whispers and judgment, but with cheers and blessings. The community, finally free from Hatch's shadow, was healing. It was becoming the town it was always meant to be. Their story became a local legend, a romance that defeated corruption and proved that love could triumph over prejudice. And it served as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most unlikely people become the heroes of their own stories. That evening, as they rode toward their mountain home, Martha knew their life wouldn't be easy. The frontier was still a harsh and unforgiving place. But as she looked at the strong, honorable man beside her, she knew she would never be alone again. If you believe that courage can be found in the quietest hearts and that love is always worth fighting for, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up. Until next time, remember that your worth is not determined by other people's limitations, but by the strength of your own character.